The office smelled like chocolate cake and cheap balloons. I walked into what looked like a birthday party, only to be handed my termination notice instead. Darren, the company president's son, smirked like he'd just given me a present. "Pack your things, Jesse. Your access gets cut in 10 minutes, he said, tapping his expensive watch. I nodded once. No tears, no arguing, no begging. The receptionist stared at me like this might be some kind of joke. It wasn't. I stepped into the elevator and caught my reflection in the polished steel doors. Today was my 35th birthday. This morning had started with Noah singing off-key while making coffee. Our dogs were spinning around the kitchen, tails wagging. I thought the day would end with dinner out or maybe a weekend trip. Instead, it was ending with unemployment. My company badge still hung from my car's rearview mirror when I called Noah. He picked up immediately, voice cheerful. "Hey, birthday girl. I got fired," I said. Silence. Then a knowing chuckle. "Good." And blinked. "Good." He explained that I'd been carrying the whole company while Darren played dress-up as an executive. He knew it. I knew it. And now Darren had just made the biggest mistake of his career. I joined Everland Homes 5 years ago when it was small but respected in the construction world. I modernized their project workflows, built safety protocols from scratch, and saved them hundreds of thousands in costs. When Gregory, the CEO, was running things, I got promoted regularly. People listened to my ideas. Then Gregory had his stroke 6 months ago. Darren, his trust fund baby son, took over everything. Within weeks, he cut entire teams, hired expensive PR agencies that did nothing, and turned my department into a scapegoat for every problem. I got excluded from meetings. My detailed reports got called too technical and hard to follow. My safety recommendations got labeled as slowing down progress. And today, on my birthday, he fired me without warning. By the time I got home, Noah had champagne waiting. He didn't need explanations. He'd been watching this train wreck for months. Darren had submitted the Ridgeview development plans under my name, but he'd changed my designs. $22 million in housing development. One structural flaw and families could die. Darren thought he could erase me quietly. Instead, he'd left himself completely exposed. I realized my firing wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something much bigger. That night, Noah spread the Ridgeview blueprints across our kitchen table. My digital signature was there, but everything important was gone. Darren had stripped away my careful safety features to make construction cheaper and faster. The result was dangerous. My hands shook as I understood what he'd done. By firing me, Darren had removed the only person who could defend these plans if something went wrong. If the structures failed, innocent families would get hurt or killed. My anger didn't burn hot like usual. It settled into something cold and sharp. Ridgeview had been my baby for 6 months. Every calculation, every safety check, every backup system. Now it was twisted into something unrecognizable, with my name stamped on it like I'd approved the dangerous changes. I barely slept that night. Not because I was scared, but because I finally had purpose again. The quiet termination wasn't going to stand. Darren thought he could steal my work and throw me away. He was about to learn that some people fight back in ways he'd never see coming. I wouldn't let families get hurt because of his greed and incompetence. This was bigger than my job now. This was about doing what was right. By morning I had a plan. I sent one careful text to Susan, the compliance officer at Everland. Check with legal before contacting me again about anything Ridgeview related. Every word mattered now. Everything had to be documented. Noah suggested meeting with someone who could take me seriously. Gina worked for the Department of Urban Development. She handled construction permits and safety violations. If anyone could understand what Darren had done, it would be her. 2 hours later, I sat in a sterile conference room with documents spread everywhere. I showed Gina every alteration Darren had made to my original designs. The timestamps proved he'd forged my approval on the dangerous changes. Gina listened without interrupting, her expression getting darker with each page. "This isn't just unethical," she said finally. "This is criminal. If those buildings collapse, families could die. My stomach dropped, but a strange calm settled over me. Darren's mistake was enormous. He'd created a paper trail that led straight back to fraud. Ridgeview would be frozen immediately, and I held all the cards that could unfreeze it. For the first time since getting fired, I felt powerful instead of angry. Noah suggested calling Gregory, the original CEO. I hadn't talked to him since his stroke, but he picked up on the first ring. "Jesse," he said. His voice raspier than I remembered. "What happened?" "I heard Darren let you go." I explained the illegal termination and the forged signature on Ridgeview. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then softly, "I'm sorry. I never should have handed control to him." He agreed to meet that afternoon. We sat at a small cafe downtown. Gregory looked thin and tired, like the stroke had aged him 10 years. "He's undone 30 years of reputation in less than one," he said, shaking his head. I stayed quiet, letting him process. "If you pursue this legally, the company could fall apart completely," he warned. He nodded. That wasn't my concern anymore. Saving a company that Darren was destroying wasn't my job. Keeping families safe was. Integrity mattered more than protecting someone who'd thrown me away. Gregory studied my face and sighed. "You're not backing down, are you? Would you?" "Yes." He smiled sadly. "No. I suppose I wouldn't either." He paused. "What do you need from me?" Darren's first email arrived that evening. The subject line read, "Let's fix this misunderstanding." Inside, he wrote about how we could work things out and move past this little issue. I deleted it without responding. More messages followed over the next few days. Polite requests turned into urgent pleas, then barely hidden threats. He still didn't realize Ridgeview was frozen or that the city was now investigating. His emails got more desperate each day. I focused on documenting everything. Every timeline, every submission, every piece of evidence that proved what he'd done. Ridgeview wasn't just a construction project anymore. It was leverage, and I planned to use every bit of it. Noah reminded me that momentum mattered in situations like this. "Strike while the iron's hot," he said. "Don't give him time to cover his tracks or spin the story." I worked late into each night, organizing files and building an airtight case. Every step I took made my position stronger. Darren had tried to erase me quietly, thinking no one would notice. Instead, he'd left a trail that no competent lawyer could ignore. The company that had fired me was about to discover they'd picked a fight with the wrong person. I pulled out an old binder from graduate school, filled with schematics and notes for a project tracking system I'd dreamed about for years. The vision was simple: track every approval, flag inconsistencies automatically, and store secure backups of everything. Proofline Project Systems was born that night. Within 2 days of Ridgeview being frozen, consultations started pouring in. Other construction firms had heard about the safety violations and wanted systems to prevent the same problems. They needed what I'd been planning to build all along. Noah helped me strategize while I scheduled meetings. Rachel, a freelance project manager I knew, agreed to help coordinate everything. Darren's massive mistake had accidentally given me the perfect platform to launch my own business. Ridgeview would be audited under my direct oversight, and for the first time in years, I'd control what happened next. The system would ensure every approval was legitimate, every signature was verified, and every safety feature stayed in place. I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced since Gregory's stroke. This wasn't just about getting back at Darren anymore. It was about building something that could prevent other families from getting hurt by careless executives who cared more about profits than people. Gina called to schedule the first official audit of Ridgeview. I arrived early with files organized and dashboards ready to present. Susan and her legal team were prepared, and Darren had been locked out of all systems pending the investigation. I walked city officials through each altered approval, every missing signature, and every safety risk Darren had created. The Proofline system worked exactly as designed. Every discrepancy got flagged automatically, and every correction was recorded with timestamps. By mid-morning, I had a complete report ready for city officials. The evidence was overwhelming. Darren had systematically removed safety features to cut costs, then forged my approval to make it look legitimate. Gina nodded approvingly as I finished the presentation. "This system is exactly what we need for all major projects," she said. "How quickly can you implement it city-wide?" Ridgeview was safe now, but more importantly, Darren's quiet attempt to destroy my career had completely backfired. Instead of ending my influence, he'd given me a platform to expand it far beyond what I'd ever imagined possible. The best part: he still didn't know what was coming. By Thursday morning, a local news website ran the headline, "Whistleblower exposes major safety violations in $22 million Ridgeview development." My name wasn't mentioned, but the documents were definitely mine. Within hours, 3 more news outlets picked up the story. City council members started issuing statements about construction oversight. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters and construction firms. Gregory called again, his voice shaky. "Darren's completely falling apart," he said. "The company's dealing with legal chaos. 3 major clients are threatening to pull their contracts." I stayed quiet, letting the storm build naturally. My oversight of Ridgeview had grown stronger each day, and every move I made increased Proofline's credibility. Media attention brought more consultation requests than I could handle. Darren had underestimated me completely. He thought I was just another employee he could dismiss and forget. Now his miscalculations were front-page news, and everyone in the construction industry was talking about it. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who'd tried to erase my reputation had accidentally made me the most talked-about safety expert in the city. His biggest mistake was becoming my greatest opportunity. I didn't respond to any of Darren's increasingly frantic calls or emails. Each ignored message made my position stronger. Ridgeview was locked down tight. Proofline was gaining clients daily, and I had legal documentation for every step of the process. Noah reminded me to pace myself, but the momentum felt unstoppable. Each day I spent reviewing files, correcting submissions, and refining system dashboards reinforced my authority over the project that had started this whole mess. Darren's messages shifted from polite to desperate to almost angry. He couldn't understand why I wouldn't talk to him. In his mind, he'd done me a favor by firing me. Now he needed me to fix the crisis he'd created. But I wasn't his employee anymore. I wasn't even his contractor. I was the independent expert the city trusted to ensure Ridgeview wouldn't kill anyone. Every action he'd taken to diminish my influence had actually increased it. The silence was strategic, and it was working perfectly. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all. Let the other person's mistakes speak louder than any argument you could make. Gregory arranged a meeting with Evelyn's board of directors. Ridgeview was still frozen, contracts were being cancelled, and they needed explanations for their investors. I arrived with organized files, clear dashboards, and evidence of every alteration Darren had made. The board members filed in looking like they'd aged years in the past week. They tried to appear calm and in control, but I could see the panic behind their professional facades. I stayed silent, letting the evidence speak first. When I finally presented my findings, every confident smirk faded from their faces. The timeline was undeniable. The signatures were clearly forged. The safety violations were potentially fatal. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth, accountability, and preventing a catastrophe. Ridgeview would move forward safely under my oversight, with proper safety features restored and verified. One board member asked quietly, "How do we fix this?" "You follow the system," I replied. "Every approval gets verified. Every signature gets authenticated. Every safety feature gets implemented and inspected. No shortcuts, no exceptions." They nodded like students taking notes. The company president's son had tried to bypass me. Now the entire board had to go through me. By late afternoon, calls started coming in from rival construction companies. They'd heard about Ridgeview's problems and Proofline's solutions. They wanted consultations, system implementations, and safety audits for their own projects. I carefully explained how the workflow operated, how dashboards tracked every approval, and how audit procedures prevented exactly the kind of fraud Darren had attempted. The companies were impressed, cautious, and eager to get started. Meanwhile, Darren's panic continued through increasingly desperate emails and voicemails. I ignored every single one. Proofline was becoming indispensable to the industry, and Ridgeview audits were bulletproof. Noah and Rachel helped coordinate the flood of consultation requests, making sure I didn't miss any opportunities. What had started as a quiet termination was becoming the foundation of my own empire. The construction industry moves on relationships and reputation. Darren had tried to destroy mine with a single signature on termination papers. Instead, he'd given me the credibility and platform I needed to build something much bigger than anything I could have accomplished as his employee. Sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming too important to ignore. I spent long evenings refining dashboards and creating detailed mock-ups of expanded system features. Gina requested a formal demonstration of Proofline for the entire Department of Urban Development. This was my chance to prove the system worked at scale. I walked her team through every feature: approval verification, signature tracking, automated compliance checks, and complete audit logs. Each component reinforced transparency and accountability in ways the old system never could. Susan and the legal team nodded approvingly throughout the presentation. Ridgeview could now continue safely under processes that no one could bypass or manipulate. Every change required verification. Every approval left a permanent record. Darren's attempt to cut corners and steal credit had created an opportunity to revolutionize how the entire city handled construction oversight. My work wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about responsibility, transparency, and protecting people from executives who valued profits over safety. The system was bigger than one project or one company now. It was becoming the new standard for how things should be done. And I was the expert everyone needed to implement it correctly. The Ridgeview Town Hall was scheduled for the following week. It would be public, with residents asking tough questions about safety, timelines, and accountability. I prepared for questions about soil stability, drainage systems, and electrical planning. Rachel helped organize presentation materials, dashboard demonstrations, and timeline explanations. Everything had to be clear enough for concerned homeowners to understand, but detailed enough to prove competence. Darren would be in the audience, quietly observing. I wouldn't speak to him or acknowledge him. The focus had to stay on the residents, transparency, and rebuilding trust that his actions had shattered. This was both personal and professional now. These weren't just houses being built. They were homes where real families would live. The safety features I designed weren't just engineering requirements. They were the difference between security and catastrophe. My heart raced thinking about speaking publicly, but I stayed calm. Ridgeview would be safe, the system would be validated, and Proofline would gain the recognition it deserved. One presentation could change everything. I started the town hall calmly, explaining my role in Ridgeview's original design, Darren's unauthorized alterations, and how Proofline would prevent similar problems in the future. The audience listened intently as I walked through each safety feature. Residents asked smart questions about soil stability, drainage capacity, and electrical safety margins. I answered factually and calmly, without getting defensive or technical. These people deserved straight answers, not corporate spin. Darren sat in the back row, taking notes like a student. For once, he was learning about accountability instead of trying to avoid it. Watching him struggle to understand concepts I'd been implementing for years was oddly satisfying. By the end, residents seemed genuinely reassured. One elderly man shook my hand afterward. "I can finally sleep at night," he said. "Thank you for caring about us." The quiet fire Darren had lit by firing me had become something powerful. Momentum, authority, and purpose. Ridgeview would be safe because someone finally had the power to ensure it stayed that way. Walking out, I realized I felt prouder of this presentation than any promotion I'd ever received at Everland. Word about Proofline spread quickly through city departments. 2 more divisions requested consultations within days of the town hall. Each successful implementation increased our credibility and expanded our influence. Darren's desperate emails continued, but I kept ignoring them. Proofline was becoming indispensable to city operations, and Ridgeview audits were setting new standards for the entire industry. Gregory called to discuss Proofline's potential beyond just Ridgeview. He could see that what had started as crisis management was becoming a complete transformation of how construction oversight worked. I realized my leverage had grown far beyond simple revenge against Darren. This was about creating lasting change that would protect countless families from executives who prioritized speed and profits over safety. Noah reminded me to maintain work-life balance, but the momentum felt too important to slow down. Proofline wasn't just responding to Darren's failures anymore. It was becoming a movement for accountability in an industry that desperately needed it. Every new client, every successful audit, every prevented safety violation proved that the system worked, and proved that Darren's attempt to erase me had completely backfired. By the end of the week, Ridgeview audits were officially complete. Every discrepancy had been corrected, every submission verified, and every safety feature properly implemented. City officials signed off on the process with unprecedented speed. Darren completed mandatory retraining under my guidance, slowly learning the accountability standards he'd spent months ignoring. His attitude shifted from defensive to genuinely thoughtful as he began understanding what proper oversight actually required. Proofline secured 3 new municipal contracts, expanding beyond construction into infrastructure and public safety projects. My credibility and control over major city projects was now unshakable. The fire Darren had started by firing me had become my foundation, solid, powerful, and permanent. What he'd meant as a quiet dismissal had transformed into the most important career opportunity of my life. City officials were already discussing expanding Proofline citywide. The system that had started as crisis management for one failed project was becoming the new standard for government accountability. I finally understood what Gregory meant about turning setbacks into comebacks. Sometimes losing a job is the best thing that can happen to your career. With Ridgeview secure, I began planning broader deployment of Proofline across city departments. Dashboard improvements, automated notification systems, and public verification tools would make the system even more powerful. Rachel worked with developers to build scalable infrastructure that could handle dozens of concurrent projects. The potential was enormous. Every major city project could be safer, more transparent, and properly accountable. I knew this expansion would change everything. Darren's quiet attempt to erase my influence had accidentally given me the platform to revolutionize government oversight throughout the entire metropolitan area. Meeting with department heads, I explained how Proofline could prevent corruption, ensure compliance, and protect public safety across every sector of city operations. Their enthusiasm was immediate and genuine. What had started as one woman's fight against an incompetent executive was becoming a comprehensive solution to problems that had plagued city government for decades. The scope of the opportunity was breathtaking. Darren thought he was removing a troublesome employee. Instead, he'd created the conditions for systemic reform that would outlast both our careers. Darren's attitude began changing during our oversight sessions. Initially resistant and defensive, he slowly became more thoughtful and careful. Module by module, he learned the standards I'd been trying to implement for years. His questions became more intelligent. His tone grew respectful. He began catching discrepancies himself instead of waiting for me to point them out. Watching this transformation was fascinating. This was when I realized the greatest victory wasn't punishment, it was leadership. Proofline taught lessons that Darren had mocked for months. Now he had to learn them properly or fail completely. Seeing someone who dismissed my expertise struggle to master concepts I'd been implementing effortlessly gave me satisfaction deeper than any public humiliation could provide. He was finally understanding what competence actually looked like. The irony was perfect. The man who'd fired me for being too technical now depended on my technical knowledge to save his family's company. The power dynamic had completely reversed, and he was beginning to recognize it. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being so good at your job that even your enemies have to admit it. 3 months after my termination, Ridgeview reopened under strict new protocols. Weekly audits, triple verification procedures, and public dashboard monitoring ensured complete compliance with safety standards. Residents were genuinely reassured by the transparency. They could see every inspection result, every approval, and every safety check in real time. Trust in the project was finally restored. Darren no longer had unilateral control over anything. Every decision required verification through proof line systems, and every change needed my approval as the certified safety oversight coordinator. Ridgeview had become my proof of concept, demonstrating that accountability and integrity could coexist with efficiency and profitability. The project would be completed safely, on budget, and ahead of the revised schedule. Every home built would meet standards that exceeded city requirements. Families moving in could sleep peacefully, knowing their houses were designed by someone who cared more about their safety than construction profits. The project that had started this whole conflict was now the foundation of everything I'd built since. Perfect poetic justice. Proofline's reputation grew throughout the metropolitan area. Municipal departments requested consultations and audits for projects across multiple cities. Media coverage highlighted transparency improvements without mentioning personal conflicts. Noah and Rachel helped manage the flood of communications and project requests. My influence had expanded far beyond what I'd ever imagined possible as an Everland employee. Every city official knew Proofline was indispensable for major projects. The system had prevented 3 potential safety disasters and identified millions in cost savings through improved efficiency. Darren's attempt to quietly erase my influence had created a career-defining opportunity that reached across the entire region. What started as personal vindication was becoming professional transformation on a massive scale. Construction companies competed to hire me for consultations. Government departments restructured their oversight processes around Proofline protocols. Industry standards were being rewritten based on my innovations. The woman who'd been fired for being too technical was now the technical expert everyone needed to succeed. The irony was delicious, but the impact was serious and lasting. Training Darren became an ongoing project that taught me as much about leadership as it did him about accountability. Initially resistant to every correction, he slowly absorbed lessons about compliance, auditing, and responsibility. I discovered that leading someone who'd tried to destroy my career required more patience and maturity than I'd expected. But watching him struggle, then gradually understand, provided satisfaction deeper than revenge ever could. Proofline wasn't just a system anymore. It was a culture of responsibility that was spreading throughout the industry. Every properly trained executive made construction safer for countless families. Darren's transformation from arrogant incompetence to careful competence proved the system worked for changing people, not just processes. The real victory wasn't destroying him. It was teaching him to be better. Sometimes the greatest revenge is forcing someone to become worthy of the position they never deserved. Making them earn respect instead of inheriting it. Giving them the tools to succeed properly. He tried to erase my influence. Instead, he'd become living proof of my method's effectiveness. Proofline project systems secured 4 major municipal contracts within 6 months. I hired additional developers and project coordinators to handle the expansion. Dashboard systems, automated compliance checks, and verification tools were implemented across the region. The city recommended Proofline as the benchmark standard for government accountability systems. Other municipalities began requesting presentations about implementing similar oversight programs. I was no longer chasing approval or validation from anyone. Instead, I was setting the standards that others had to meet. The platform Darren had accidentally created by firing me had become an empire. Every successful implementation proved that accountability and efficiency could work together. Proper oversight didn't slow down projects. It prevented expensive disasters and rebuilt public trust. The woman who'd been dismissed as too technical was now the technical expert reshaping how government worked. The fire Darren had lit to destroy my career had become the foundation of something much larger than either of us had imagined possible. His biggest mistake had become my greatest opportunity. And the best part was, he'd created it all himself. I was invited to speak at a regional conference on ethics in urban development. Standing before hundreds of construction professionals, I shared lessons about protecting communities through proper oversight and accountability systems. After my presentation, a young woman approached me nervously. She looked anxious but determined, asking how to protect her work from executives who might steal credit or cut safety corners. I handed her my business card. "Document everything," I said. "Protect yourself legally. Build systems they can't bypass or manipulate. Most importantly, never let anyone convince you that safety is optional." It was a moment that reminded me why I'd fought so hard, stayed silent when necessary, and built Proof Line from nothing. This wasn't just about my career, it was about creating tools for others facing similar challenges. The next generation of engineers and project managers deserved better protection than I'd had. They needed systems that would prevent executives like Darren from endangering communities through incompetence and greed. My story could become their roadmap for fighting back intelligently instead of just getting angry. 6 months after Darren fired me on my birthday, my career had become unshakable. Proof Line expanded across 3 cities. Ridgeview families were safe in properly built homes. Even Darren had learned accountability and respect for the systems I'd created. Gregory officially approved citywide expansion of Proof Line for all major municipal projects. The company that had fired me was now completely dependent on the systems I'd built to survive. That evening, Noah grilled dinner while I watched sunset from our back deck. The dogs played in the yard, and everything felt peaceful in a way it hadn't for years. The greatest revenge hadn't been destroying Darren or Everland. It was building something so important that they couldn't function without it. It was becoming indispensable instead of just getting even. The quiet fire Darren had started by dismissing me had become my foundation, solid, permanent, and unshakable. I was finally free from needing anyone's approval, in complete control of my professional destiny, and unstoppable in ways I'd never imagined possible. Sometimes losing everything is the first step toward building something even better. His attempt to erase me had made me impossible to ignore.